on making it to the end of the course. In this final lesson, we're going to pull everything together and we're going to talk about something that ultimately determines whether any AI initiative is going to succeed or fail, which is organizational readiness. In other words, how do you build a culture where AI is used well? If you think back to the beginning of the course, we talked about companies that rushed into AI and they struggled. You heard Alex and Guy giving examples of what leaders really have already known for decades, which is that culture eats strategy. The technology, you can get that part right. That's the straightforward part. But the harder task is changing people, helping your people to adapt to this new way of working. So, as always, I've prepared a written piece that goes deeper into this topic. You're welcome to read that on your own. It includes some additional ideas and some strategies for building the right kind of culture. But in this short lesson, we're going to focus on three things. First, we're going to look at how AI has fundamentally changed what workplace learning looks like. Second, we'll talk about how leaders like you can define the balance of labor between what humans are going to do and what machines are going to do in your business. And finally, I'll walk you through 6 practical leadership strategies that you can start using right away to build that culture of AI readiness. And that's going to support any tool adoption that you pursue after this course. First, let's talk about how AI has changed the rules of workplace learning. Before this AI boom, our career knowledge tended to hold its value for years. People would take a course in their respective field and they'd earn some kind of a credential, and you could apply that same knowledge for years on the job. The underlying assumption was stability. Once you acquired it, your expertise, it remained useful to you for a really long time. But AI disrupts that model by accelerating how quickly all these tools that are now on our desks, they're changing. And so if you're going to keep up, you have to constantly learn new approaches while simultaneously unlearning the outdated skills. And it's happening in a matter of weeks, the things that previously you could have utilized for years. So the usual shelf life of our technical knowledge is shrinking, and mastery is becoming perishable, particularly in these high tech fields. So if you look at any industry, and I'm going to use real estate for an example, but if you look at the traditional model of professional training that we're all used to, which is that you trade some classroom time for a license or a credential, okay? So pre-licensing requirements for real estate, it varies, of course, by jurisdiction, but let's say that it's somewhere between 6 months to about 90 classroom hours, okay? That's the time that it takes. If you compare that side by side, that same 6-month window, major AI systems in recent months shifted 8 different times, which means they either got a new model or a new reasoning or a totally big update or a new release. And the people who were using those AI models basically had to retrain themselves 8 times in the time that it used to take somebody to get an entire license. Okay. And so this is true for any industry, and leaders need to be thinking about how we have to have a new model of workplace training, because as fast as it's taking somebody to build a deck or a course or even print the handouts, many times that content is already outdated or even obsolete when you're teaching AI. So if you send somebody to a workshop, that learner gets a certificate of completion. That's not necessarily proof that this person will be competent in the long term with AI. That is just a snapshot of what they knew at this moment in time. Now, because skills begin to decay almost as soon as we learn them, the traditional role of experts is also breaking down. Expertise is now distributed across the organization. So in other words, there really is no such thing anymore as a guru of AI, because it's changing too quickly for any single expert to stay authoritative. It's literally impossible for one person to keep up with the pace, or at least well enough for them to be the expert or the guru on the subject. Historically, you'd bring in a consultant, somebody who had racked up years of experience on a certain topic, and they would come in and teach your people. But now that expertise is no longer going to be top down like it used to be. Sure, you'll have a few AI workshops here and there in your company, but the new model is going to be more of a decentralized, peer-driven learning model, where your employees are learning by testing their own tools in their own workflows, and then they're going to go share what they discover with. And instead of people trying to master all of AI, individual people are going to gravitate naturally towards different corners of it, whatever appeals to their strengths and interests. So like one person may go very deep on prompts and another person on agentic workflows. Your creatives are going to get good at the image and video generation, and some are going to focus on like the ethical and legal implications. So each person is going to have a little slice that they can realistically keep up with, and the organization is going to depend on the collective expertise to all come together, and that's going to happen with peer sharing. Now, while we're talking about learning and development, there's another cultural shift leaders need to be prepared for, and that is that seniority no longer shields leaders from learning. The old model that was taught to us, whether we were millennials or Gen X or the boomer generation, we were taught that you work hard early in your career so that you can relax later. In other words, pay your dues in your 20s, and then the pace is going to ease up in your 50s. Over time, you acquired hard-earned expertise in your craft and wisdom about whatever your field was. And then eventually, many people got promoted into management. At that point, the role shifted. You were less of the day-to-day doer, and you were more of a leader. You were managing the teams of people who did the work that you used to do. Seniority, though, no longer exempts you from learning new tools in the world of AI, because the entire workplace is changing, and leaders are going to have to visibly participate in that experimentation too, because leaders are the ones who are responsible for making the decisions about this technology. So they have to know how to ask questions and how to test workflows, and ultimately they're going to have to learn alongside their teams. So we have to normalize beginnerhood across the organization, no matter what level you're in. Now that we've talked about how AI is changing learning, there's another cultural shift that you as a leader have to think about, which is how the work itself gets done. Leaders have to define the human AI balance of labor. Now, depending on where you work, you could be in one of two camps. There are some organizations that are not using AI at all. They're in this old school mentality. They don't even realize how much this technology could be helping to streamline things. But then on the other hand, you have those extremely tech forward companies with the very modern thinking people who are using AI almost too much. They're trying to plug it into every single process, and they're starting to see consequences like maybe data breaches, or the AI is making some embarrassing mistakes. So both extremes exist. The cost of doing nothing versus the cost of doing too much too fast and putting out that AI slop work. One of the most immediate tasks that leaders should be doing right now is helping teams to identify where AI outperforms us and where humans have to stay in charge, at least for now. What is the machine so fast and so good at that we would be silly not to delegate that? And what specific tasks is the machine terrible at? There's already research that shows where AI excels and where it fails. And so leaders can translate that knowledge into a practical document that's going to reassign some of the work based on people's strengths and the strengths of their AI partner, right? Because we're better together. So one tool that I've included for you is a side-by-side showing where AI performs best and which tasks have to remain human-led. So the next step for you would be to do a capability mapping exercise where you look at this sheet and you align it directly into the workflows related to your products and your services, your operations, your marketing, figuring out how do you divide roles differently and what is it about the work that's going to start to look different. A useful way to think about this division is the distinction between the first 90% of a task and the final mile. For example, AI can speed up the early stages of a project. It can produce drafts, it can do summaries and outlines, and initial analysis is very good at that. But what it cannot reliably do is own that last mile. So deciding what matters in this situation with these people under these constraints. Only humans can do stuff like reading the room in a client meeting or understanding the motivation behind a decision. Only humans can interpret ambiguous situations, and you can read emotions and politics and understand your audience, relationships. Basically being able to read between the lines and adding context that the AI never will. So you need a human to be in the loop, to fact check the AI's work, to step in whenever there's an automated process that happens to be stuck. And so this means that the role of your highest performer is going to change. It's not about the person who is the most productive and can pump out a bunch of work fast. Your best employees are the ones who can direct machines, and they can challenge the output when it's not right, and they can protect the meaning of whatever it is that your business is producing. Leads us to quality versus volume. AI does dramatically lower the cost of producing all kinds of content, and it can analyze and it can make new ideas, but that makes it tempting for organizations to want to focus on quantity with a lot of speed. So leaders have to step in and reinforce just a very simple cultural concept, which is that AI should be augmenting your processes, but not diluting the quality. The goal here is you want to produce work that is combining the speed of that machine with human originality. Organizations that are taking the time to protect that balance are not going to fall into just automating a bunch of mediocrity, but you're still going to benefit from the scale that AI provides. Now, the last thing I want to leave you with is a practical set, 6 actions. It's called the Leadership Toolkit for Building an AI Culture. In a moment, I'm going to briefly walk through each of those strategies, and then you'll be able to review them for yourself in the summary that accompanies this lesson. Before we do that, though, I want to point your attention to the final discussion prompt. It's located near this video, and here's the discussion question. Which strategy from today's session were you most interested in putting into practice and why? In your response, I want you to explain why that particular strategy was the one that stood out to you, and what does it reveal about the kind of AI culture that your organization needs to build? All right, so here's the Leadership Toolkit for Building AI Culture. There's 6 of them. I want you to go in and read them, and then you'll be able to answer your discussion question. Number 1 is clearly explain why your organization is adopting AI. Remember, you as the leader are the messenger. And I know that technology can sometimes be kind of dry and it can be hard to bring it to life. And so you have to be able to craft a compelling story, telling people the purpose and the meaning behind why we're even doing this. That's how you're going to get your people to rally behind you. So we've given you some tips about that. Number 2, teach employees transferable AI skills instead of tools. This goes back to what we said earlier. If you are just doing tool training or vendor training, as fast as that workshop ends, those skills are already starting to decay. And so we want to be teaching things that are agnostic of tools and that can stand the test of time as these models rapidly change. So things like prompt engineering and agentic workflows. So teaching those transferable skills that don't require a specific version of a specific model. Number 3 is building a peer sharing process where employees are regularly teaching their AI discoveries to their peers, which relates to number 4, which is letting your employees experiment with self-selected projects. Number 5 is all about incorporating responsible AI use into your performance expectations. A lot of companies haven't changed the way that they do KPIs and employee reviews in many, many years. And we are going to have to make some slight adjustments to how we do that, especially how employees get to set goals around how they're using AI, especially using it responsibly. And then number 6 is establishing clear rules for safe and responsible AI use. So this is the policy piece. You are now equipped with that executive fluency and you have the resources so that you can stop treating AI like it's just an experiment. You're going to start supervising an effective system of artificial intelligence. Remember, those public AI tools, those are a commodity. Everybody has them. But your unique leadership around how they're used is what's going to put a moat around your business that your competitors cannot copy. I want to thank you for joining us on this journey. It has been a pleasure putting this course together for you, and congratulations on taking the first step. You've completed it toward leading your AI native organization.